On her 20th wedding anniversary, Catherine sat alone in a five-star restaurant, 7 months pregnant, waiting for a husband who would never show up. What he didn't know was that the quiet housewife he'd been ignoring for years secretly owned a tech empire worth over $800 million. And tonight, she was done hiding. This is the story of betrayal, revenge, and the ultimate comeback. Stay with me because every twist will make you question who's really in control, and the ending you won't see it coming. If you love stories of justice served and power reclaimed, hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next incredible story. Mrs. Sterling, your husband called to say he'll be late again. Catherine Sterling looked up from her phone, meeting the sympathetic gaze of the maitre d' at Chez Laurent. The man's voice carried that particular tone reserved for wives who waited alone at anniversary dinners, a mixture of pity and professional discretion that Catherine had heard too many times before. Henri Dubois had been working at this establishment for 15 years, and he'd seen Catherine sit at this same table, waiting for Brandon, more times than either of them cared to count. "Thank you, Henri," Catherine said, her hand unconsciously moving to her 7-month pregnant belly. The baby kicked, as if sensing her mother's disappointment. "I'll wait a bit longer." The classical piano music drifted through the restaurant, a melancholy piece by Chopin that seemed almost too appropriate for the moment. Around her, the soft clink of crystal glasses and murmured conversations of couples who had actually shown up for their reservations created a symphony of normal relationships, the kind where partners valued each other's time, where anniversaries meant something more than just another day to work late. 20 years. Catherine thought about the number as she sipped her sparkling water, the bubbles tickling her nose. 20 years of marriage to Brandon Sterling, and she couldn't remember the last anniversary he'd been on time for. Actually, that wasn't true. She could remember it was their 5th anniversary, back when Sterling Industries was still struggling, back when Brandon needed her emotional support and the mysterious cash injections that kept appearing just when the company needed them most. The candle on her table flickered, casting shadows across the empty place, setting across from her. The waiter had discreetly removed the second-place setting after the first hour, but Catherine had asked him to put it back. Hope, she supposed, was the last thing to die in a marriage. Her phone vibrated against the white tablecloth. Brandon's name flashed on the screen, and for a moment, Catherine considered not answering. But 20 years of conditioning won out. "Catherine!" His voice was sharp, impatient, the same tone he used with junior executives who disappointed him or vendors who didn't deliver on time. "Listen, something came up at the office. Big merger discussion with the Tokyo branch. You understand?" In the background, Catherine heard it feminine laughter, high and tinkling like champagne glasses touching. Then music, but not the kind played in offices. This was club music, the bass thumping through Brandon's phone. She heard the distinct sound of a champagne cork popping, followed by more of that feminine laughter. "Of course, Brandon," she replied, keeping her voice measured, educated, hiding the exhaustion that had settled into her bones like lead. 20 years of practice had made her an expert at hiding her true feelings. "The merger is important." "Good. Don't wait up." He hung up without saying goodbye, without mentioning their anniversary, without asking about the baby, without even pretending to care anymore. The server approached with a dessert plate chocolate souffle with a delicate sugar sculpture on top, artfully crafted to look like 2 swans with necks intertwined. "Compliments of the house, Mrs. Sterling, for your special day." Catherine smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes, Brandon used to say, were like melted chocolate, warm and inviting. Now they were just tired. "How thoughtful. Please thank the chef for me." As she sat there, surrounded by happy couples celebrating their own milestones, her phone buzzed with a social media notification. Brandon's executive assistant, Jennifer, had tagged him in photos. Jennifer was young, ambitious, and completely unaware that her boss's wife followed her Instagram account under a pseudonym. Catherine knew she shouldn't look, but her finger moved of its own accord, drawn by the same morbid curiosity that made people slow down at accident scenes. There he was, her millionaire husband, though she was already thinking of him as her soon-to-be ex-husband, with his arms wrapped around a young model named Scarlett Rose. The timestamp showed 15 minutes ago. The location eclipse. Manhattan's most exclusive nightclub, where membership alone cost more than most people's annual salary. In the photo, Brandon's hand rested low on Scarlett's back. Too low for a business meeting, too intimate for a casual acquaintance. Scarlett was everything Catherine wasn't. 23 years old, blonde, thin in that way that suggested she lived on green juice and cocaine, wearing a dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent and left nothing to the imagination. Catherine took a slow, measured breath, a technique she'd learned in the prenatal yoga classes she attended alone, while Brandon was supposedly in board meetings. She studied the photo more carefully. Behind Brandon and Scarlett, she could see other Sterling Industries executives, all raising glasses in what looked like a celebration. The Tokyo merger, apparently, required champagne and models. The waiter returned, hovering discreetly. "Would Madame like anything else? Just the check, please," Catherine said, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. As she signed the credit card receipt, Brandon's credit card, which would soon be cut off if she had anything to say about it, Catherine made a mental note to call her lawyer in the morning. Not Brandon's lawyer, not the family lawyer who handled their estate planning, but her lawyer, the one Brandon didn't know existed, just like he didn't know about so many other things. Henri appeared with her coat, a cashmere wrap that Brandon had given her for Christmas 5 years ago, back when he still bothered with gifts that weren't selected by his assistant. "Mrs. Sterling," Henry said quietly as he helped her with the coat, "if I may say so, you deserve better." Catherine met his eyes, surprised by the breach in professional protocol. Henri had a daughter about her age. She remembered. He'd mentioned it once. "Thank you, Henri," she said simply. "I'm beginning to believe you're right." As she stepped into the rainy Manhattan evening, her driver holding an umbrella over her head, Catherine Sterling made a mental note to call Patricia Morrison in the morning. Patricia was the best divorce attorney in New York, and more importantly, she specialized in high-net-worth divorces where one spouse had hidden assets. Because while Brandon thought he was married to a former secretary who should be grateful for his success, the truth was much more complicated. The rain pelted against the car windows as her driver navigated through the Manhattan traffic. Catherine placed her hand on her belly, feeling the baby move. "It's just you and me now, little one," she whispered. "But don't worry. Mommy has been preparing for this day for a very long time." The coffee maker gurgled in the pristine kitchen of their Manhattan penthouse, a $15 million piece of real estate that Brandon loved to brag about at parties. Catherine sat at the breakfast bar, her laptop open to spreadsheets Brandon never knew she understood. The morning news played softly on the television, something about tech stocks that would have interested her more if she hadn't been calculating exactly how much her hidden empire was worth. The spreadsheets told a story Brandon had never bothered to read. Chen Technologies she'd kept her mother's maiden name for the company. Though Brandon had never asked about her mother's family beyond confirming they couldn't contribute to the wedding costs. The company was now worth $800 million, with subsidiaries in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and biotech, all built while Brandon thought she spent her days at charity lunches and spa appointments. The private elevator chimed, its sophisticated sound designed to be pleasant rather than jarring. Brandon walked in, still wearing yesterday's Armani suit, his silver hair slightly mussed, smelling of perfume that wasn't hers. The perfume was expensive. She recognized it as Tom Ford's Lost Cherry, about $500 a bottle. Scarlett had expensive taste, apparently. "Catherine," he said, not meeting her eyes as he poured himself coffee from the machine that cost more than most people's cars. "We need to talk about our arrangement." She closed her laptop slowly, deliberately, folding her hands over her pregnant belly. The baby was quiet this morning, as if sensing the tension in the room. "Our arrangement, is that what we're calling our marriage now?" Brandon's jaw tightened. He hated when she questioned him, especially with that calm, measured tone that made him feel like he was being analyzed. It was the same tone she'd used when she'd suggested he invest in certain tech startups. Suggestions he'd laughed off until his golf buddies made the same recommendations months later, after Catherine had already secured her own positions through shell companies. "Don't be dramatic," he said, using his CEO voice, the one that made junior executives cry in the bathroom after meetings. "You know what I mean. This situation isn't working anymore. A man in my position needs a certain type of partner. And what type is that, Brandon? Catherine asked, watching him fidget with his platinum wedding band, the one she'd saved for 6 months to buy him when they were young and poor and supposedly in love. Back when they lived in that tiny apartment in Queens, when she worked as a secretary during the day and coded at night, building the foundation of what would become her empire while Brandon attended business school on loans she'd helped him secure. Someone who understands the demands of the business world, he said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone he used with anyone he considered beneath him, which was almost everyone. Someone who can keep up with the social requirements of being married to a CEO. Someone who can be an asset, not a liability. Catherine almost laughed. If only he knew that she'd been the asset all along, that every major success Sterling Industries had achieved in the last 20 years had been orchestrated by her, planned through careful market manipulation and strategic investments that Brandon thought were lucky coincidences. We've grown apart, Catherine, he continued, warming to his rehearsed speech. You must see that. You've let yourself go. He gestured vaguely at her pregnant belly, as if their child was evidence of her failure rather than their commitment. You don't understand what it takes to maintain my image. When was the last time you came to a corporate event looking like someone who belongs on my arm? 3 weeks ago, Catherine replied evenly. The Sterling Industries charity gala. I wore the Oscar de la Renta gown, the one you said made me look like I was trying too hard. I spoke with the Japanese investors about their interest in quantum computing applications, though you introduced me as your wife who dabbles in reading about tech. Brandon's face flushed. He hadn't expected her to remember the details. Certainly hadn't expected her to throw his words back at him. That's exactly what I mean. You're passive-aggressive, Catherine. It's exhausting. I see many things, she replied, taking a sip of her decaf tea, a special blend she imported from Japan that cost $200 a pound. Brandon had complained about the expense until she told him it was from the grocery store. Including the photos from Eclipse last night, Scarlet Rose seems very understanding of your position. Brandon's face went from flushed to pale in seconds. He hadn't expected her to know already. In 20 years of marriage, he'd grown complacent, assuming Catherine was too naive, too trusting, too dependent to pay attention to his activities. That's a business relationship, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is that what we're calling it? Catherine echoed his earlier words back to him, a technique she'd learned in the negotiation seminars she attended while Brandon thought she was at book club. How long has this business relationship been going on? 3 months, 6. Brandon was quiet for a moment, and Catherine could see him calculating, trying to figure out how much she knew, how much he could lie about. Finally, his shoulders slumped slightly. 8 months. The admission hung in the air between them like a physical presence. 8 months. Catherine had been pregnant for 7, which meant he'd started his affair when they were supposedly trying for this baby, when he'd held her hand at the fertility clinic and promised they were in this together. 8 months, Catherine repeated, her hand moving protectively over her belly. I see. This is exactly what I mean, Brandon said, anger replacing his momentary vulnerability. You're passive-aggressive. Catherine, you manipulate every conversation. You've let yourself go. You don't understand what it takes to maintain my image, to run a company like Sterling Industries. You sit here in this penthouse I pay for, living off my success, contributing nothing? Catherine stood slowly, her movements deliberate despite her advanced pregnancy. At 7 months, she moved with the careful grace of someone carrying precious cargo, which she was. Perhaps you're right, Brandon. Things do need to change. He blinked, surprised by her agreement. In 20 years of marriage, Catherine had never agreed with him this easily, especially not about something this significant. Usually, she fought, quietly but persistently, wearing him down with logic and emotional appeals until he either gave in or stormed out. Good, he said, suspicious but trying to maintain control. I'll have my lawyer contact yours. We can make this clean. The prenup is straightforward. Yes, Catherine said, already walking toward the bedroom they'd shared for 2 decades. Let's definitely involve the lawyers. Patricia Morrison comes highly recommended. You've already found a lawyer. Brandon's voice cracked slightly. When? Catherine paused at the doorway, not turning around. 8 months ago. Brandon, you just told me how long. As she disappeared into the bedroom, Brandon stood alone in the kitchen, suddenly uncertain about who had really been in control of this conversation. His phone buzzed, Scarlett asking about the divorce timeline, wondering when she could start posting pictures of them together publicly, planning their future with his money. He smiled, reassuring himself. Catherine was a housewife with no resources. The prenuptial agreement he'd insisted on 20 years ago would ensure she got nothing. She'd been a secretary making $25,000 a year when they met. She had no family money, no trust fund, no safety net. She needed him. In the bedroom, Catherine pulled out her secure phone, the one registered to her company, not to Mrs. Brandon Sterling. She sent a single text to David Park, her assistant at the company Brandon didn't know existed. It's time to execute Project Renaissance. David's response was immediate. All assets prepared for revelation, legal team on standby, media contacts ready. Your empire awaits your command? Catherine smiled, the first genuine smile she'd had in months. How many women have heard these same words from their millionaire husbands? She thought as she began packing. How many had been told they were being traded in for a newer model, like a car that had depreciated past its useful value? How many had been told they contributed nothing while simultaneously being the invisible foundation holding everything together? She pulled out the designer luggage Brandon had bought her for their 10th anniversary, back when he still remembered anniversaries, and began filling it with carefully chosen items. Not the flashy jewelry he'd given her to show off his wealth, but the practical things, documents, hard drives, the photos of her parents he'd never asked about. Her phone rang. Patricia Morrison's name appeared on the screen. Catherine. Patricia's voice was warm but professional. David told me you're ready to proceed. He asked for a divorce this morning, Catherine confirmed, admitted to an 8-month affair. On recording. I hope everything in our penthouse is recorded, Catherine said. Security system Brandon insisted on. He just never asked who actually controlled the data. Patricia laughed. This is why you're my favorite client. 20 years of preparation for this moment. Most women don't think this far ahead. Most women trust their husbands, Catherine replied, folding a simple black dress, the one she'd worn to her father's funeral. The one Brandon said made her look poor. I stopped trusting Brandon the day he made me sign that prenup without letting me have a lawyer review it. That's when I knew I needed my own empire. Speaking of which, the financial forensics team found something interesting in Sterling Industries' books. Catherine paused in her packing. Oh. Brandon's been using algorithms to make his trading decisions. Very sophisticated algorithms that seem to predict market movements with uncanny accuracy. The kind of algorithms that would take a genius-level understanding of both markets and coding to create. Imagine that, Catherine said dryly. The interesting part is these algorithms match exactly the ones registered to Chen Technologies' intellectual property portfolio. The portfolio you've been building for 20 years. He's been stealing from me. It wasn't a question. For approximately 10 years, generating hundreds of millions in profits he's claimed as his own business acumen. Catherine, this isn't just divorce. This is corporate theft on a massive scale. Catherine sat on the bed, her hand on her belly as the baby kicked. Patricia, I want you to document everything, but don't file anything yet. Let Brandon think he's winning for a while. The prenup he's so proud of has an infidelity clause he probably forgot about. Infidelity during pregnancy voids the entire agreement. You've known about that clause for 20 years, haven't you? I wrote it, Catherine admitted. Brandon was so focused on making sure I couldn't claim his future earnings that he didn't read the fine print about what would void the agreement. His lawyer was fresh out of law school, desperate to please. I may have suggested some language that seemed favorable to Brandon, but actually protected me. Brilliant. When do you want to reveal Chen Technologies? Catherine looked around the bedroom at the designer clothes Brandon had chosen for her. The jewelry meant to mark her as his property, the life she'd pretended to live while building something real in the shadows. Soon, she said, but first let him show the world who he really is. Let him parade Scarlett around. Let him trash me in public. Let him think he's won. The higher he builds his house of cards, the more spectacular the collapse. The conference room at Patterson, Morrison and Associates smelled of leather and old money, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. The law firm occupied the entire 40th floor of a building that predated most of Manhattan's skyscrapers. Its prestige measured not in modern amenities but in the photographs of famous clients lining the walls: senators, celebrities, and more than a few billionaires who needed discreet representation during messy divorces. Brandon sat across from Catherine. His lawyer, a sharp-suited Wall Street type named Marcus Fitzgerald, shuffling papers with aggressive efficiency. Marcus was everything Brandon valued in a lawyer: ruthless, expensive, and completely without conscience. His Rolex caught the light as he arranged documents, a subtle display of wealth that Brandon appreciated. "Let's make this quick," Marcus said, his rapid-fire speech interrupting any attempt at pleasantries. "My client is a busy man. The prenuptial agreement from 20 years ago is clear. In the event of divorce, Mrs. Sterling receives only what she brought into the marriage." Patricia Morrison, Catherine's lawyer, was everything Marcus wasn't: warm voice with steel underneath, patience masking strategic brilliance. She adjusted her reading glasses, a simple pair that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and picked up the prenuptial agreement. Patricia had been practicing law for 30 years, had handled divorces for 3 Supreme Court justices' wives, and had never lost a case where hidden assets were involved. "Which was nothing," Brandon added, his phone buzzing constantly with texts from Scarlett. He didn't even try to hide them anymore, the screen lighting up with messages like, "When can we go public? Baby, and the Cartier bracelet is perfect." "Catherine was a secretary when we met," Brandon continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "I've been more than generous over the years. The clothes, the jewelry, the lifestyle, all provided by me. She's lived like a queen on my success." Catherine sat quietly, hands folded over her belly, observing Brandon's confidence like a scientist studying a specimen. She wore a simple black dress today, nothing flashy, the kind of outfit that whispered rather than shouted. Brandon had always underestimated the power of whispers. Brandon's phone rang. He looked at it, then at the room. "I need to take this. It's about the Tokyo merger." "By all means," Patricia said smoothly. "We'll wait." Brandon stepped out into the hallway, his voice carrying through the glass doors. "Scarlett, baby, I told you I'm in the lawyer's office. Yes, the divorce will be final soon. Yes, you can start looking at wedding venues." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Even he seemed to realize his client's lack of discretion wasn't helping their case. When Brandon returned, Patricia had spread several documents across the table. "Mr. Sterling, I've been reviewing this prenuptial agreement, and there's an interesting clause here on page 18. Marcus snatched the document, scanning quickly. His speed-reading ability was legendary in legal circles, part of what made him worth his $2,000 hourly rate. "What clause? This is a standard agreement from 20 years ago." "Standard, perhaps," Patricia said, her voice maintaining that perfect balance of professional courtesy and underlying threat. "But there's an invalidation clause, Section 18R 3.2. She read aloud, "In the event of infidelity during pregnancy, resulting in abandonment of marital duties, the prenuptial agreement becomes void." The room went silent except for the sound of Brandon's phone vibrating against the conference table. Another text from Scarlett, the preview showing a photo of wedding dresses. "That's ridiculous," Brandon erupted, his face turning red. "Abandonment? I'm sitting right here. I haven't abandoned anything." "At your 20th anniversary dinner last night," Patricia asked mildly, "or during the 12 prenatal appointments you've missed, the 3 ultrasounds you didn't attend. The birthing class you said was unnecessary because that's what doctors are for?" She pulled out a tablet, swiping through documents. "We have documentation of your 8-month affair with Ms. Monroe's, including credit card receipts, $5,000 at Tiffany's last month, $12,000 at Bergdorf Goodman last week, the private jet to Miami for a weekend when you told your wife you were at a conference in Boston." Marcus was scrambling through the papers now, his usual composure cracking. This is circumstantial. "We also have hotel records," Patricia continued calmly. "The 4 Seasons penthouse suite, billed to Sterling Industries as client entertainment. Though I'm curious which client required entertainment that included champagne, strawberries, and a couple's massage." She swiped again. and social media posts where Miss Rose refers to you as her future husband, dating back to when Mrs. Sterling was only 1 month pregnant. This one is particularly interesting, a photo of Ms. Rose wearing a necklace with the inscription, BS Forever. I assume BS stands for Brandon Sterling, not the more obvious interpretation. Brandon's phone rang again. Scarlett calling this time. He declined the call, but Catherine saw the preview of her follow-up text. Did you get rid of her yet? Baby, the wedding planner needs a deposit. She gets nothing. Brandon slammed his hand on the table, making everyone except Catherine jump. The coffee cups rattled, and Marcus's Mont Blanc pen rolled onto the floor. She brought nothing. She contributed nothing. I built my empire while she sat at home spending my money. Catherine spoke for the first time since the meeting began, her voice calm and measured. We'll see about that, Brandon. The quiet confidence in her voice made Brandon pause. He'd heard that tone before, usually right before a business rival discovered they'd been outmaneuvered. But this was Catherine, his quiet, submissive wife, who spent her days at charity lunches and prenatal yoga. The woman who'd needed his permission to buy a new car, who'd asked his opinion on every major purchase, who deferred to his judgment on everything from where they lived to what they ate for dinner. What's that supposed to mean? Brandon demanded. It means, Patricia said, pulling out another folder, that we've done some forensic accounting. Mr. Sterling, are you aware that your wife inherited a substantial sum when her father died 15 years ago? Brandon laughed. Her father was a nobody, an immigrant who ran a small electronics repair shop. An immigrant with 14 patents in semiconductor technology, Patricia corrected. Patents that were sold to Intel for $40 million. Money that Mrs. Sterling invested wisely. That's impossible. I would have known. Would you? Catherine asked quietly. When did you ever ask about my family? Brandon. When did you ever care about anything that wasn't directly related to your success? Marcus was reviewing the new documents, his face growing paler with each page. Brandon, we need to discuss. Furthermore, Patricia continued, there's the matter of intellectual property theft. The algorithms Sterling Industries has been using for the past 10 years, the ones that generated approximately $300 million in profits, were developed by Mrs. Sterling and are registered to her company. Her company, Brandon's voice cracked. Catherine doesn't have a company. Patricia smiled, the expression of a chess player about to say checkmate. Chen Technologies. Incorporated 20 years ago, the day after your wedding, currently valued at $800 million. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus's pen, which he'd been nervously clicking, stopped mid-click. Brandon's phone, which had been buzzing constantly, seemed to have gone silent, as if even Scarlett sensed something monumental had shifted. You're lying, Brandon whispered. Catherine stood slowly, deliberately, her pregnancy making the movement graceful rather than awkward. Brandon, I've been running a tech empire for 20 years while you thought I was planning dinner parties. Every major success Sterling Industries had was because I manipulated market conditions to favor your moves. Every brilliant insight you had came from conversations I carefully orchestrated. You haven't built an empire, you've been playing with toys in a sandbox I created. She walked to the window, looking out at Central Park. The prenup is void due to your infidelity during my pregnancy. The intellectual property theft is criminal fraud. You've been stealing from me while cheating on me. So the question isn't what I get in this divorce. Brandon, the question is whether I press criminal charges or let you walk away with some dignity intact. Brandon's phone buzzed. Scarlett again. Brandon, answer me. The wedding planner is waiting. He looked at the phone, then at Catherine, then at the documents spread across the table showing his wife was worth more than 10 times what he was. This isn't over, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. No, Catherine agreed, turning to face him. It's just beginning. 3 days later, in a building Brandon never knew Catherine owned, the real story began to unfold. The 40-floor glass tower on Madison Avenue housed Chen Technologies, though the name on the building was deliberately generic Madison Business Center. Catherine had purchased it 10 years ago through a shell company, paying cash in a deal that had made real estate news but kept her name completely out of it. The building alone was worth $200 million now. Manhattan real estate being what it was, Catherine stepped out of the executive elevator, and immediately the atmosphere changed. Gone was the cautious, deferential housewife Brandon knew. Here she was, Ms. Chen, CEO and founder, a woman who commanded respect through brilliance rather than demanding it through bullying. "Good morning, Ms. Chen," her assistant David Park greeted her, using her maiden name with obvious relief. David had been with her for 15 years, recruited straight from MIT where Catherine had spotted his potential during a guest lecture she'd given under a pseudonym. "Ms. Chen, the Tokyo office needs your approval on the merger," another assistant said, approaching with a tablet. "Ms. Chen, Forbes called again about the interview. They're very persistent about featuring you in their Women in Tech issue." "Tell Forbes not yet," Catherine said, settling into her ergonomic chair designed for pregnant executives, something she'd had custom-made when she realized standard office furniture wasn't designed for pregnant CEOs. But soon, 20 years of hiding, and Catherine could finally breathe in her own space. Her office, the one Brandon thought was her book club meeting room when she'd mentioned it once, overlooked Central Park. The walls were lined with awards and patents, all under her maiden name or various shell companies. The MIT Excellence in Innovation Award, the Turing Foundation's Distinguished Achievement Medal, recognition from IEE for breakthrough work in quantum computing applications. "David," she said, pulling up multiple screens on her desktop setup, "play Brandon's latest voicemail." Brandon's voice filled the room. Slightly slurred, he'd been drinking more lately. "Catherine, I'm being generous, offering you the apartment. Don't push me. You know you can't survive without my money. Just take the deal and stop embarrassing yourself. This whole charade about owning a company is pathetic. Nobody believes it." David's face flushed with protective anger. "Should I draft a response? Something along the lines of showing him the latest quarterly reports?" "No," Catherine said, pulling up financial reports on her massive monitor. "Let him keep believing what he wants to believe. How's our stock doing? Up 12% since last quarter. The AI subsidiary you founded is now valued at $300 million alone. The quantum computing division just landed the Department of Defense contract. That's another $500 million over 5 years. Combined with the other holdings, Chen Technologies' total value is $843 million as of this morning's market close." Catherine finished, a small smile playing at her lips. Not bad for a former secretary who contributed nothing. David had been with her long enough to know the full story. "Why did you hide it so long? Why let him treat you that way, especially these last few years when he became unbearable?" Catherine turned to look out at the city, her hand on her belly as the baby kicked strong kicks, like her daughter was already fighting to make her presence known. "My father taught me patience. He came to America from Taiwan with nothing, built his electronics repair shop into something more. When the big companies tried to steal his patents, he fought them quietly, strategically. He won because they underestimated him." She pulled up an old photo on her personal screen, her father in his shop, surrounded by circuit boards and soldering irons. "Before he died, he told me, 'Catherine, find a man who loves you when you have nothing, because then you'll know it's real. But never actually have nothing. Always have your own power, hidden if necessary.' But Brandon loved me when I was poor," Catherine said softly. "Or at least, I thought he did. So I kept my inheritance secret when my father died. $40 million from the patent sales, plus another $20 million in life insurance and investments he'd made. I told Brandon my father left me nothing but debt, and he believed it because it fit his narrative of saving me." She pulled up a complex financial chart showing 20 years of market movements. "Look at this. Every major success Sterling Industries had in the last 20 years, see the pattern. 3 months before each breakthrough, Chen Technologies made strategic moves that created the perfect market conditions. When Brandon wanted to expand into Asian markets, I had already established partnerships there. When he needed capital for acquisitions, mysterious investors appeared with exactly the right amount. You were puppeteering his entire career." "Not puppeteering," Catherine corrected. "Testing. I wanted to see if success would change him, if he would become a true partner once he felt secure. Instead, he became worse. The more successful Sterling Industries became, the more he dismissed my contributions, the more he treated me like an accessory rather than a person." David pulled up another screen. Speaking of Sterling Industries, we have a situation. The forensic accountants found something significant. Catherine leaned forward, reading the data. The numbers were worse than she'd expected. He used my investment accounts to fund his personal projects. $2 million over the last 3 years, all transferred without authorization. But that's not the worst part. David pulled up code comparisons. The algorithms Sterling Industries has been using your algorithms. He's been selling them to competitors as his own work. We're talking about intellectual property theft worth hundreds of millions. Catherine sat back, her expression thoughtful. This changed everything. Brandon hadn't just cheated on her emotionally and physically, he'd stolen from her while doing it, and then sold what he'd stolen. Patricia needs to see this immediately, she said. But David, I want you to start something else. Begin the process of revealing Chen Technologies' true ownership. Gradually, start with the tech blogs. Let them pick up the scent. I want the revelation to seem organic, not orchestrated. That will cause a media storm. When they realize you're worth $800 million while Brandon's only worth $50 million, then maybe other women in my position will realize they have options, Catherine said firmly. Financial independence after 50 isn't just a dream. It's very, very possible if you plan for it. David nodded, then hesitated. There's something else. We intercepted communications between Scarlett Rose and someone named Marcus, not Brandon's lawyer. A different Marcus. She's not who she seems to be. Catherine raised an eyebrow. Oh. Her real name is Sandra Kowalski. She's done this before, targeted wealthy married men, convinced them to leave their wives, then took them for everything. She's got a boyfriend who helps run the con. They've been planning this for over a year, specifically targeted Brandon at that conference in Vegas. The one where he said he made the connection that led to the Tokyo merger. Catherine laughed, but there was no humor in it. Of course. She played him from the beginning. Should we warn him? Catherine considered this, then shook her head. He wouldn't believe us. He'd think it was jealousy or spite. Besides, he deserves to learn this lesson the hard way. Send everything to Patricia, though. It might be useful in court. Her phone buzzed. A text from Margaret Wilson, one of her few real friends who knew the truth about her situation. Saw Brandon at the club with that child. She was wearing your grandmother's necklace, the one he said was lost. Catherine's jaw tightened. Her grandmother's necklace, a simple jade pendant that had been in her family for generations. She'd thought she'd misplaced it, had blamed herself for being careless. But Brandon had taken it and given it to his mistress. David, she said, her voice taking on an edge he rarely heard. Accelerate the timeline. I want the board of Sterling Industries to know who really owns the majority shares by end of week. You own shares in Sterling Industries. Catherine smiled, and it was the smile of a predator who'd been pretending to be prey for far too long. 60%, acquired through various shell companies over the years. Every time Brandon needed emergency capital, I was there with a mysterious investor. He was so grateful, so relieved. He never questioned where the money came from or why the terms were so favorable. She stood, moving to the window wall that looked out over Manhattan. Somewhere out there, Brandon was probably having lunch with Scarlett, planning their future with money he thought was his, never realizing he'd been living in a house of cards Catherine had built and could demolish with a whisper. It's time for my midlife transformation journey to become public, she said. 20 years of hiding is enough. Let's show the world what a dismissed housewife can accomplish when she's underestimated. Brandon stood at the podium in Sterling Industries' press room, his silver hair perfectly styled by the professional who'd spent an hour making him look approachably successful, his media trainer's exact words. The lighting had been adjusted 3 times to minimize the bags under his eyes from sleepless nights spent fighting with lawyers. His expression was appropriately somber, with undertones of hope. He'd practiced it in the mirror that morning until it looked natural. Thank you all for coming, he began, his voice carrying just the right amount of gravitas. The teleprompter held his prepared remarks, but Brandon prided himself on speaking from the heart, or at least appearing to. I want to address the rumors about my personal life with transparency and honesty. Catherine watched from her office, David beside her with a tablet tracking social media responses in real time. The comments were already pouring in, most of them not favorable to Brandon. After 20 years of marriage, Brandon continued, Catherine and I have grown in different directions. While I've been building Sterling Industries into the powerhouse it is today, she's been unable to adapt to the demands of being a CEO's wife. Unable to adapt, David scoffed. You literally run a bigger company than he does. Catherine shushed him, wanting to hear Brandon's full performance. She'd known this was coming. Brandon's need to control the narrative was as predictable as his Thursday golf games. The stress of my position, the late nights, the constant travel, it takes a toll on a marriage, Brandon said, his voice dripping with false regret. Catherine is a good woman, but she comes from a simple background. She never quite understood the sacrifices necessary for success at this level. A reporter raised her hand, Jennifer Chen from the Wall Street Journal, someone Catherine had secretly fed stories to for years. Mr. Sterling, what about the fact that your wife is 7 months pregnant? Brandon's jaw tightened slightly, a tell Catherine recognized from 20 years of marriage. He was angry, but trying not to show it. Catherine will be well provided for within the bounds of our prenuptial agreement. I'm not the villain here. My ex-wife contributed nothing to my success. She's been living off my hard work for 20 years, and I've been more than generous. Another reporter, this one from TechCrunch. Is it true you're already engaged to Ms. Rose? Brandon's face transformed into what he thought was a humble smile. I've found a true partner in Scarlett Rose, someone who understands ambition, drive, and the sacrifices necessary for success. Scarlett stepped out from the wings, and the cameras went wild. She wore a designer dress that Catherine recognized. She'd donated it to charity last year after wearing it once to a gala Brandon had forgotten to attend. The irony wasn't lost on her. Scarlett held up her hand, showing a massive diamond ring that caught the light like a small sun. Brandon proposed last night. We're planning a spring wedding, something intimate, just close friends and family. By intimate, she means $1 million affair at the Hamptons, David muttered. Catherine turned off the screen. He's really digging his own grave, isn't he? The internet is destroying him, David said, showing her his tablet. The hashtag Our Poor Catherine is trending. Someone found old photos of you two from when you were young, before Sterling Industries. You look so happy in them. Catherine glanced at the photos, her and Brandon in their tiny Queens apartment. Her in a simple sundress, him in jeans and a t-shirt, both grinning at the camera like they'd won the lottery just by finding each other. She remembered that day. They'd just gotten engaged, and Brandon had promised her the world. He'd delivered on that promise, she supposed. He just hadn't mentioned that the world would be a cage. Later that afternoon, Catherine had her routine obstetrician appointment at Mount Sinai. The waiting room was full of pregnant women in various stages, some with attentive partners, others alone like her. She'd stopped being embarrassed about Brandon's absence around month 4. As she waited, she couldn't help but overhear 2 nurses discussing the news. Did you see that press conference, that poor woman, 7 months pregnant, and he parades his new girlfriend on television? Men like him always trade up for younger models. Though honestly, the wife seems better off without him. Can you imagine being married to that narcissistic ex-husband for 20 years? Still, imagine being thrown away after 20 years. She probably has no skills, no money of her own. These society wives never do. She'll get some divorce settlement, but it won't be enough to maintain the lifestyle she's used to. Catherine smiled behind her magazine, this month's issue of Wired, which featured an article about revolutionary AI applications in healthcare. The journalist had interviewed the mysterious founder of Chen Technologies via encrypted email, never knowing they were talking to the pregnant woman sitting in doctors' waiting rooms. Her phone rang. Patricia Morrison. Catherine, you need to hear this. My forensic accountants found more than just fraud. Brandon's been using your investment algorithms, the ones you developed, and selling them to competitors as his own work. We're talking corporate theft on a massive scale. How much? Potentially hundreds of millions in damages. Catherine, we could destroy him. Criminal charges, civil suits, complete financial ruin. Catherine stood as the nurse called her name. Patricia, I don't want to destroy him. I want something better. I want the truth to come out naturally. Let him dig his hole deeper. The deeper he goes, the more spectacular the revelation will be. You're playing a long game. I've been playing a long game for 20 years, Catherine replied. I can wait a few more weeks. Besides, I want him to marry Scarlett first. You want him to marry the con artist? I want him to get exactly what he thinks he wants, Catherine said. A younger, prettier version who understands his position? Let him learn what that really means. Scarlett Rose lounged in the private suite at Serenity Spa, her phone pressed to her ear as she got her third facial of the week, all charged to Brandon's credit card. Of course, the esthetician worked silently, used to wealthy clients having conversations as if they weren't there. Baby, you should see this idiot, she said, her voice high and sweet when talking to clients, but dropping to its natural harsh tone with her real boyfriend, Marcus. Brandon's easier to manipulate than we thought. He actually believes I'm in love with him. Chalpuri, Catherine's private investigator, positioned in the next suite with high-tech recording equipment, adjusted his earpiece. Every word was being captured in crystal clear quality. The divorce settlement is the problem, Scarlett continued, examining her nails a $40 gel manicure she'd gotten that morning. That pathetic wife of his might not get much because of the prenup, but every dollar she gets is less for us. Though honestly, she's so plain and boring. No wonder he upgraded to me. She laughed, the sound like breaking glass. You should have seen her at that charity thing last month. 7 months pregnant, waddling around like a whale, trying to maintain dignity while everyone knew her millionaire ex-husband was with me. It was actually sad. All those women supporting women, pretending she wasn't pathetic. How long until you can divorce him and take half? Marcus asked through the phone. My lawyer says 18 months minimum to make it look legitimate. But get this, the fool already agreed to no prenup with me. Can you believe it? Makes his wife sign one but thinks I'm different? Men and their egos, I swear. He thinks because I'm young and beautiful, I must truly love him for himself. The spa attendant entered with Scarlett's gold-infused mask and $800 treatment that claimed to reverse aging, though Scarlett was only 23 and had no aging to reverse. I have to go, baby. Remember, we need Brandon to think you're just my personal trainer for now. Once I'm Mrs. Sterling and have access to everything, we can stop pretending. The financial independence after 50 crowd can keep their inspirational quotes. I'm getting mine at 23. She hung up and immediately called Brandon, her voice switching to sugary sweetness, like flipping a switch. Darling, I'm at the spa you recommended. You're so thoughtful. Oh, I might have gone a tiny bit over budget on my shopping today. You don't mind, do you? I saw the most amazing necklace at Cartier. It reminded me of your eyes. Brandon's voice through the phone was indulgent, the tone of a man who thought he was winning. Anything for you, sweetheart. Catherine never appreciated nice things. She once told me a necklace was just compressed carbon. Can you imagine no sense of romance? She sounds awful, Scarlett cooed. How did you stand it for 20 years? I ask myself that every day. But now I have you, someone who understands what it means to be with a successful man. Catherine received the recording 3 hours later. She listened to it while sitting in the nursery she'd been decorating soft yellows and greens. Gender neutral, despite knowing she was having a girl. Brandon hadn't asked about the baby's gender. He'd been too busy posting photos with Scarlett on Instagram. Photos where he looked like a middle-aged fool trying to recapture his youth. She's a professional, the investigator told Catherine over secure phone. This is her 4th wealthy mark. The last 3 were too embarrassed to press charges after she cleaned them out. 1 committed suicide. Send this to Patricia, Catherine said calmly. But don't release it yet. I want Brandon to marry her first. He needs to fully experience the consequences of his choices. You want him to marry a con artist? Catherine smiled, feeling the baby kick. He deserves exactly what he thinks he wants, a younger, prettier version who understands his position. Let him learn what that really means. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying someone yourself. It's letting them destroy themselves while you watch. Suttonham. That evening, Brandon brought Scarlett to the country club, the same one where Catherine had been a member for 15 years, where she'd served on the board for 10, where she'd quietly made connections that had facilitated Brandon's business deals without him knowing. Catherine was there for the monthly charity board meeting, something Brandon had forgotten despite her reminding him that morning via text. She'd worn a simple but elegant maternity dress, her grandmother's pearls, not the jade necklace Brandon had stolen. but the pearls he'd never known about because he'd never asked about her grandmother. He walked in with Scarlett on his arm, her designer dress cut inappropriately low for the conservative venue, her laugh too loud, her gestures too dramatic. Catherine sat with the other board members, all women over 50 who'd known her for years, who'd watched her pretend to be less than she was for 2 decades. "Catherine, darling," Brandon said loudly, ensuring everyone could hear. "You should be home resting, not desperately social climbing. In your condition, these late nights can't be good for you." The room fell silent. 200 of Manhattan's elite all turned to stare. The president of the club, Mrs. Eleanor Fitzgerald, no relation to Brandon's lawyer, actually gasped at the rudeness. Catherine stood slowly, deliberately, commanding the room's attention with the same presence she used in board meetings Brandon knew nothing about. The baby kicked as she rose, as if offering moral support. "Brandon," she said, her voice carrying perfectly in the hushed space, "I've been social climbing here for quite some time. Funny how men never notice what their wives actually do all day." She walked closer, each step measured. The other board members watched with barely concealed delight. They'd been waiting for this moment. "But you're right about one thing. I should be more careful about the company I keep. Some associations are simply beneath me." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Doesn't she own this place?" Mrs. Fitzgerald stood up. "Actually, Mr. Sterling, I think you should know that Catherine owns this country club. Has for 15 years. She bought it with her inheritance and turned it from a dying institution into the premier social club in Manhattan. Every improvement, every prestigious new member, every successful fundraiser, that was all Catherine." Brandon's face went white. Scarlett's grip on his arm tightened, her calculator mind already reassessing the situation. "That's impossible," Brandon stammered. "You were a secretary. I was working as a secretary. Brandon, there's a difference. Just like there's a difference between building an empire and taking credit for someone else's work." Catherine turned to the room. "If you'll all excuse me, I have a conference call with Tokyo. Some of us actually run our own companies." She walked out, leaving Brandon standing there with his mouth open, Scarlett's nails digging into his arm as she hissed, "You said she had nothing. You said she was nobody. This changes everything." David Park sat in Catherine's real office, the one with the view of Central Park. Not the fake one Brandon had seen once and dismissed as trying too hard, coordinating with a team of private investigators spread across 3 computer screens. The investigation into Scarlett Rose, real name Sandra Kowalski, had uncovered a web of deception that would have impressed Catherine if it weren't so predatory. "We've tracked Scarlett's history," the lead investigator reported via encrypted video call. "She's got a pattern. Targets married men during vulnerable periods, usually midlife crisis or major business stress. She studies them for months, sometimes years, building a profile of exactly what they want in a woman, then becomes that fantasy." Catherine reviewed the files while her other hand rested on her belly. The baby had been active all morning, as if sensing the tension. Previous victims: 3 confirmed, 2 suspected. A pharmaceutical executive in Chicago lost $4 million in 18 months. A real estate developer in Miami lost $6 million, and his company. A senator from Texas, that one got messy, but they paid her off to go away quietly. He's still in therapy. Why didn't they press charges? Embarrassment. These are powerful men who don't want to admit they were fooled by a pretty face and some flattery. She's careful to make everything look like gifts, consensual transfers. She documents everything to make it seem like a real relationship. Love letters, photos, videos. She creates a narrative that would stand up in court. Catherine pulled up Sterling Industries' financial records. She still had access through her shell company's board positions. She's already cost Brandon $2 million in 3 weeks. At this rate, she'll bleed him dry before they even marry. "Should we warn him?" David asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Catherine considered this, then shook her head. "He made his choice. Besides, would he believe us? He'd think it was jealousy or spite. A narcissistic ex-husband like Brandon can't conceive that someone might be playing him the way he played me." Her secure phone buzzed, a message from one of her board members at Sterling Industries. "Emergency meeting called. Brandon trying to push through sale of company assets. Needs your shares to block? Catherine smiled. David, it's time. Release the first wave of information about Chen Technologies. Start with TechCrunch. They've been asking about the mysterious company that's been making waves in quantum computing. How much do you want to reveal? Just enough to make people curious. Valued at over 500 million, founder preferring to remain private. Major contracts with Fortune 500 companies. Let them dig. Journalists love a mystery. That afternoon, Catherine attended the monthly charity luncheon at the Carlisle Hotel. 8 months pregnant now. She moved more slowly but still with inherent grace. She dressed carefully designer maternity wear that whispered money rather than shouted it. Her mother's pearl earrings that Brandon had never noticed because they weren't flashy enough for his taste. Margaret Wilson was already there, saving Catherine a seat. You look radiant, she said, then lowered her voice. Unlike your soon-to-be ex, who looks like he's aged a decade in the past month. As if summoned by the mention of his name, Brandon walked in with Scarlett. He'd clearly been drinking, his face was flushed, his walk just slightly unsteady. Scarlett clung to his arm, her eyes scanning the room like a predator, identifying the weakest prey. The confrontation came during the cocktail hour. Brandon, emboldened by whiskey and Scarlett's encouragement, approached Catherine's table where she sat with 6 other women, all successful in their own right, a federal judge, a best-selling author, a hedge fund manager, 2 doctors, and a university president. Ladies, he said with false charm, then focused on Catherine. Catherine, you're looking tired. The stress of divorce proceedings. I suppose, fighting a battle you can't win. Actually, I've never felt better, Catherine replied, not looking up from her phone where she was approving a $40 million acquisition. Amazing how much energy you have when you remove toxic elements from your life. Scarlett giggled that practiced, tinkling laugh. Brandon's been so worried about you, haven't you? Darling, all alone, trying to manage without him. It must be so hard, facing your 50s with nothing to show for it but a failed marriage. Ah, Margaret snorted into her champagne. Yes, Catherine's really struggling. Just yesterday, she was agonizing over whether to buy that tech startup for $40 million or wait until the price dropped to $35. Brandon's eyes snapped to Catherine. What startup you don't have $40 million? Catherine finally looked up, her expression serene. You're right, Brandon. I don't have $40 million. Brandon smirked, vindicated. I have $800 million. Catherine continued conversationally. Give or take a few million, depending on market fluctuations. But who's counting? The silence that followed was deafening. Scarlett's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. You're lying, Brandon whispered. Catherine stood, pulling out her phone. With a few taps, she brought up a news article that had just gone live. Chen Technologies revealed as major player in tech industry. Mysterious company valued at over 800 million, founder identity still unknown. She showed him the screen. That's my company. Brandon, has been for 20 years. Every algorithm you've been using mine. Every lucky market prediction me. Every mysterious investor who saved Sterling Industries. Also me. This is fraud, Brandon shouted, drawing stares from everyone in the room. You hid assets that's illegal in a marriage. Judge Patricia Hendricks, who happened to be at the next table, turned around. Actually, Mr. Sterling, maintaining separate assets acquired before marriage or through inheritance is perfectly legal. What's illegal is stealing intellectual property and selling it as your own. I believe that's what you've been doing with your wife's algorithms. Brandon's face went from red to white. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about, the judge replied coolly. I also know your divorce case is being heard in my court next week. I suggest you get a better lawyer than Mr. Fitzgerald. He's out of his depth. Scarlett tugged on Brandon's arm. We should go, baby. These bitter old women are just jealous. Catherine laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise everyone, including herself. Scarlett, or should I say Sandra Kowalski? I'm many things, but jealous of you isn't one of them. How's Marcus? By the way, your real boyfriend, Scarlett froze. I don't know what you're talking about. No, then you won't mind if I share these recordings with Brandon. Catherine pulled out her phone again. You know, the ones where you call him an idiot and discuss your plans to take him for everything he's worth. Those are fake, Scarlett said quickly. Too quickly. Brandon looked between them, confusion replacing anger. What recordings? The ones from the spa this morning. Would you like to hear them? Brandon, would you like to hear what your true partner really thinks of you? Scarlett grabbed Brandon's arm. She's lying, baby. She's just a bitter, discarded wife trying to cause trouble. Let's go. But Brandon was looking at Catherine now, really looking at her for the first time in years. She stood there, 8 months pregnant with his child, surrounded by successful women who clearly respected her, holding evidence that she was worth more than he'd ever dreamed, and offering him the truth about the woman he'd thrown everything away for. Play them, he said quietly. Brandon. No. Scarlett tried to pull him away, but he shook her off. Catherine hit play. Scarlett's voice filled the room. Baby, you should see this idiot. Brandon's easier to manipulate than we thought. He actually believes I'm in love with him. The room was silent except for the recording. Brandon's face crumbled as he heard Scarlett describe him as a fool, heard her laugh about his desperation to feel young, heard her plan to destroy him financially. When it finished, Scarlett was already backing toward the door. That's not me. That's AI or something. Deep fake. It's you, Brandon said quietly. That's your real voice, the one you use when you think I'm asleep. Scarlett's mask finally slipped completely. You stupid old man. You think you're special? You're just another midlife crisis with a bank account. At least your wife was smart enough to hide her money. You practically threw yours at me. She stormed out, her heels clicking on the marble like gunshots. Brandon stood there and swaying slightly, looking lost. For a moment, Catherine almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Catherine, he started. No, she said firmly. Don't. You made your choices. Brandon, now live with them. She walked past him, her head high, her hand protectively over her belly. Behind her, she heard Margaret say to someone, now that's how you handle a narcissistic ex-husband with class. The Sterling Industries boardroom had never been this tense. Emergency session, called with only 2 hours' notice. Brandon strutted in, confident despite recent events that this was about damage control, about spinning the narrative back in his favor. After all, he'd been handling this board for 15 years. They were his people, his allies. Gentlemen, he began, not noticing the 3 women board members' slight frowns at the exclusionary greeting. I know there have been concerns about my personal situation, but I assure you, Mr. Sterling, the chairman, Robert Blackstone, interrupted. His voice was colder than Brandon had ever heard it. We're not here about your divorce. We're here about the majority shareholder's request. What majority shareholder? Brandon laughed, the sound forced and hollow. I own 40%. The rest is divided among 15 different investors. Was divided, Robert corrected. Until this morning, when we received notification that several shell companies are all owned by the same entity, Mr. Sterling, the majority shareholder, is on the line. The conference phone in the center of the mahogany table crackled to life. Good afternoon, everyone. Brandon froze. He knew that voice, had heard it every morning for 20 years, usually asking if he wanted coffee or reminding him about appointments he'd forgotten. But there was something different about it now, a confidence, an authority he'd never heard before. Catherine, he breathed. Ms. Chen, actually, Catherine corrected. I've owned 60% of Sterling Industries for the last 5 years, bought it up quietly whenever you needed emergency capital and didn't want to dilute your personal stake. You were so grateful for those mysterious angel investors. Remember, the board members exchanged glances. Several had suspected something like this but hadn't pieced it together until now. Martha Rodriguez, the CFO, was already pulling up records on her laptop, her eyes widening with each discovery. This is illegal, Brandon shouted, slamming his fist on the table. Insider trading, manipulation, fraud. Everything was done through proper channels, with full SEC compliance. Catherine's voice remained calm through the speaker. I have excellent lawyers, Brandon. I've had them for 20 years. You just never noticed because you assumed the bills you saw were for the divorce lawyer I obviously couldn't afford. Robert cleared his throat. Ms. Chen has called for a vote of no confidence in the current CEO. You can't do this. Brandon's face was purple now, the veins in his neck standing out. I built this company from nothing with my bare hands. With whose initial investment? Catherine asked. Check the incorporation documents. Brandon, page 47, subsection 3A. That mysterious $100,000 in seed money that you told everyone came from your business acumen? It came from my father's life insurance. I gave it to you as a wedding gift. Remember? You said we didn't need papers between us because we were in love. Martha turned her laptop screen toward the room. There it was, in black and white. Catherine Chen, initial investor. Date 3 days after their wedding. But more importantly, Catherine continued, let's discuss the algorithms you've been selling to competitors. My algorithms. Brandon, the ones I developed while you thought I was playing housewife? That's corporate theft. And the FBI tends to take that seriously. The FBI, Brandon's voice cracked. Oh yes, they're very interested in how Sterling Industries' proprietary trading algorithms match exactly the ones registered to Chen Technologies' intellectual property portfolio. Registered, I might add, 3 years before Sterling Industries developed them. Robert stood up. Mr. Sterling, in light of these revelations, I call for an immediate vote. All in favor of removing Brandon Sterling as CEO. Every hand went up except Brandon's. Motion carried. Mr. Sterling, security will escort you to clear your office. You have 1 hour to remove personal items only. Company property, including all computers and files, remains here. 2 security guards entered, their faces professionally neutral, but their stance suggesting they were ready for resistance. Brandon stood on shaking legs. Catherine, please, let's talk about this. You're carrying my child. Our child, Catherine corrected. And she'll grow up knowing that her mother built an empire while her father tried to steal it. She'll know about financial independence after 50, about midlife transformation journeys, about not letting anyone make you smaller than you are. This isn't over, Brandon said as security moved toward him. Actually, it is, Catherine replied. Oh, and Brandon Scarlett left the country this morning. Apparently, her boyfriend Marcus had warrants in 3 states. You might want to cancel those credit cards you gave her. She maxed them out on her way to the airport. As security escorted Brandon out, his phone buzzed constantly. Word was already spreading. TechCrunch had just published shocking revelation: Sterling Industries, actually controlled by Shadow Tech Empire, run by CEO's pregnant wife? The Forbes headline was even more brutal: from secretary to secret billionaire, how Catherine Chen played the long game. But the one that would hurt Brandon most was from the Wall Street Journal. Sterling Industries stock soars on news of CEO change markets, celebrate Catherine Chen's takeover. Within 6 hours, the story had gone viral in a way that only modern scandals could. And Catherine Chen was trending globally. But more tellingly, Sir Brandon got played was the top hashtag in the United States. Memes proliferated at the speed of thought. Brandon's smug press conference announcing the divorce juxtaposed with headlines about Catherine's wealth. His photo with Scarlett next to Scarlett's mugshot from a previous arrest that internet sleuths had uncovered. The tech blogs were having a field day. TechCrunch ran a deep dive, the 20-year con, how Catherine Chen built an empire while her husband took credit. They'd found patents, shell company registrations, even anonymous posts in tech forums that could be traced back to Catherine's IP addresses, showing she'd been actively involved in the tech community while pretending to be a housewife. Wired published an exclusive, "We interviewed Chen Technologies' mysterious founder. 5 years ago, we just didn't know it was Catherine Sterling." The piece revealed that Catherine had been corresponding with tech journalists for years under pseudonyms, accurately predicting market trends and technological breakthroughs. Brandon, holed up in a hotel room because the penthouse was in Catherine's name. Another surprise revelation watched his net worth evaporate in real time. Sterling Industries' stock was soaring, but he no longer owned any of it. His personal accounts had been frozen pending investigation. Scarlett had maxed out his credit cards to the tune of $300,000 in her final shopping spree. His phone rang constantly. First, the anger stage. Catherine, you vindictive witch. You've ruined me 20 years of marriage, and this is how you repay me. Then bargaining, we can work this out. Think of our history. 20 years has to mean something. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. Then desperate pleading, please, Catherine, I have nothing. The FBI is investigating me. My lawyers abandoned me. I'm staying at a Holiday Inn. A Holiday Inn. Catherine. Each voicemail was more pathetic than the last. Catherine didn't respond to any of them. She was busy with more important matters like preparing for the birth of her daughter and the official unveiling of Chen Technologies. The court hearing for the divorce settlement was held on a Thursday morning. Judge Patricia Hendricks, known for her no-nonsense approach to high-net-worth divorces, reviewed the evidence with raised eyebrows that climbed higher with each revelation. "Mr. Sterling," she said, looking over her glasses at Brandon, who appeared in a suit that was clearly off the rack. His designer wardrobe had been seized as potential evidence. "Let me summarize what I'm seeing here. You admitted to an 8-month affair during your wife's pregnancy. You've been proven to have stolen proprietary algorithms from your wife's company. You transferred $2 million from her investment accounts without authorization. You attempted to hide assets during divorce proceedings, and you're asking this court for what exactly?" Brandon's new lawyer, a public defender, since no private attorney would take his case without a retainer, he couldn't pay, stammered through a response about marital assets and contributions to the household. "Your Honor," Patricia Morrison stood, impeccable as always in a suit that cost more than Brandon's current net worth. "My client is willing to forgive the $2 million in stolen funds and won't press criminal charges for the corporate theft. Despite the FBI's interest in pursuing the case, in exchange, she's asking for full custody with supervised visitation rights and no financial support from Mr. Sterling." "She doesn't want alimony?" the judge asked, surprised. "In a 20-year marriage, my client is worth $843 million as of this morning's market close. Your Honor, she doesn't need Mr. Sterling's money. She never did. However, she would like to make a statement." Catherine stood, now heavily pregnant, but carrying herself with the dignity of someone who'd already won. "Your Honor, any settlement that might have been awarded to me, I'd like to donate to the Manhattan Women's Shelter, specifically for their new program supporting women over 50 escaping narcissistic abuse in their marriages. I want to call it the Phoenix Fund for women rising from the ashes of their former lives." The judge nodded approvingly. "That's very generous. Miss Chen, Mr. Sterling, you're getting off remarkably easy here. Criminal charges could result in significant jail time. I suggest you take this deal." Brandon had no choice. He signed the papers with a shaking hand, watching his last connection to the life he'd known dissolve. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Catherine, flanked by Patricia and David, walked past most of them, but stopped for one, Jennifer Chen from the Wall Street Journal, the reporter who'd asked the hard questions at Brandon's press conference. "Miss Chen, how does it feel to win?" Catherine paused, considering. "This isn't about winning. It's about women supporting women through transitions. It's about financial independence after 50. It's about showing that midlife transformation journeys don't have to end with being discarded. Sometimes they begin there. What's next for you?" Chen Technologies is going public next month. We're also launching an initiative to help women over 50 start their own businesses. And personally," she placed her hand on her belly, "I'm about to become a mother. Everything else is secondary to that." "Any words for your ex-husband?" Catherine thought for a moment. "I hope Brandon learns from this experience. I hope he realizes that success built on someone else's foundation isn't real success. And I hope he becomes a better father than he was a husband." As her car pulled away, she saw Brandon exit the courthouse through a side door, trying to avoid the press. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. His shoulders were slumped, his designer confidence replaced with the shuffling walk of a defeated man. For a moment, their eyes met through the car window. Catherine didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply nodded an acknowledgement of what they'd once been to each other, and then looked away. The delivery room at Mount Sinai was a stark contrast to the cold courtroom where Catherine's marriage had officially ended just 2 weeks ago. Here, surrounded by the warmth of chosen family, Catherine labored to bring new life into the world. Margaret Wilson held one hand, Patricia Morrison the other. David Park paced in the waiting room with a dozen of Catherine's employees who'd insisted on being there. The entire board of Chen Technologies had sent flowers. The room looked like a botanical garden. "You're doing amazingly, Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation." Despite the shared surname encouraged. "One more big push," Catherine bore down, drawing on the same strength that had carried her through 20 years of hiding her true self. The same determination that had built an empire in shadow. The same resilience that had survived Brandon's betrayal. And then, cutting through everything else, the sound of new life. Elizabeth Chen's first cry filled the room strong, clear, announcing her presence to the world without apology. "She's perfect," the nurse said, placing the baby on Catherine's chest. 7 pounds, 3 ounces of perfect. Catherine looked down at her daughter, tears streaming down her face. Elizabeth had her mother's dark hair, already thick and wild, and when she opened her eyes, they were that newborn blue that might turn brown like Catherine's or stay blue like Brandon's. But what struck Catherine most was the expression on that tiny face, alert, observant, already studying the world she'd been born into. "Hello, Elizabeth," Catherine whispered. "Welcome to a very different world than the one I thought you'd enter. A better one, I promise." Margaret leaned over, her own eyes wet with tears. "She's beautiful, Catherine. She looks like you." "She looks like herself," Catherine corrected gently. "Her own person from the very beginning." 3 hours later, after the nurses had completed their checks and Elizabeth had successfully nursed for the first time, Catherine was settling into the recovery room when a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Brandon stood there, holding wilted grocery store flowers, carnations dyed unnatural colors, the kind sold at gas stations at midnight. He looked terrible. His suit, clearly the same one he'd worn to court, was wrinkled. He'd lost weight, making his expensive clothes hang wrong on his frame. His silver hair, usually perfectly styled, was unkempt. He looked every one of his 58 years, and then some. Can I come in?" he asked, his voice uncertain in a way Catherine had never heard before. Catherine looked at Patricia, who stood up. "I'll be right outside," her lawyer said, giving Brandon a warning look as she passed. Brandon shuffled in, not approaching the bed, clutching the sad flowers like a shield. "She's beautiful," he said, looking at Elizabeth sleeping in Catherine's arms. "Looks like you." "That seems to be the consensus," Catherine said neutrally. "Catherine, he started, then stopped, seeming to search for words. "Scarlett's gone." Took everything she could carry and disappeared. Apparently she and her boyfriend had been planning this for over a year. "The FBI says I'm lucky she didn't take more." "I know," Catherine said simply. "You knew." His face flushed slightly. "You could have warned me." "Would you have believed me?" Catherine asked. "When have you ever believed me about anything important?" "Brandon, when I told you that merger with Technotron was a bad idea, when I suggested you diversify the portfolio, when I said Scarlett seemed suspicious." Brandon fell silent, then sank into the visitor's chair. The vinyl squeaked under his weight. "I've lost everything. My company, my reputation, my money. I'm working as a consultant now. Actually, that's a lie. I'm working as a junior analyst at a firm that Chen Technologies owns. I report to someone 15 years younger than me." "You haven't lost everything," Catherine said, adjusting Elizabeth slightly. "You have the chance to be a father. A real father this time." "I made a mistake. Catherine." The words tumbled out of him, desperate and rehearsed. "You're my wife. We have 20 years of history. We can fix this. I've learned my lesson." Catherine looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in years. He seemed so small now, stripped of his CEO title, his younger girlfriend, his perceived power. This was Brandon without the armor of success, and what was left was not much. "I was never your wife, Brandon," she said quietly but firmly. "I was your investor, your strategist, your safety net. I was the woman who made herself smaller so you could feel bigger. But I was never truly your wife, because a wife is a partner, an equal, someone whose opinions and contributions are valued. You never saw me as any of those things." "I can change." "No," Catherine interrupted. "You can't. And more importantly, I don't want you to. Not for me. I'm done being anyone's rehabilitation project. But Elizabeth will need a father, and I hope you can be that for her. A better father than you were a husband? How? Brandon's voice cracked. How am I supposed to be a father when I'm nobody now? When I have nothing to offer? Catherine shifted Elizabeth so Brandon could see her face better. You offer her your time, your attention, your genuine interest in who she becomes. All the things you never offered me, you can offer her. That's worth more than money, Brandon. I should know I had all the money in the world, and it couldn't buy me a real marriage. Brandon stood to leave, placing the wilted flowers on the bedside table, where they looked even sadder next to the elaborate arrangements from Catherine's real friends. For what it's worth, I'm testifying against Scarlett. The FBI arrested her at the airport. She had 3 different passports. Good, Catherine said. Maybe it will help the next woman she targets. Brandon paused at the door. Catherine, why did you stay with me for 20 years if you had all this money, all this power? Why stay? Catherine considered the question. It was one she'd asked herself countless times. At first, it was love, then it was hope. Then it was strategy. I needed to be sure my company was strong enough to stand without Sterling Industries. And finally, she looked down at Elizabeth. Finally, it was timing. Everything happened exactly when it needed to happen. If I'd left you 5 years ago, 10 years ago, Chen Technologies wouldn't be what it is today. I wouldn't be who I am today, and Elizabeth wouldn't exist. Brandon nodded slowly, understanding perhaps for the first time that Catherine had always been playing a longer, more complex game than he could imagine. He left without saying goodbye, his footsteps echoing down the hospital corridor. An hour later, Margaret returned with champagne non-alcoholic for Catherine. The real thing for everyone else? Patricia raised a toast to Catherine Chen, who proved that the best revenge is a life well lived. To Elizabeth Chen, Catherine countered, who will never have to hide her light to make someone else comfortable. As they drank, Catherine's phone buzzed with a notification. Chen Technologies' IPO had been approved. The initial valuation, $1.2 billion. She was officially a billionaire. She looked down at Elizabeth, who was beginning to wake, making those small sounds newborns make when they're deciding whether to cry or go back to sleep. Your mama's a billionaire, she whispered, but more importantly, your mama's free. The auditorium at the Javits Center was packed with 500 women, all entrepreneurs or aspiring business owners. The Phoenix Rising Women's Entrepreneurship After 50 conference had sold out in 3 days, with a waiting list of hundreds more. Catherine stood at the podium, Elizabeth sleeping peacefully in a carrier against her chest. Her voice was stronger now, more confident, filling the space without a microphone. Behind her, a massive screen showed her journey in images, the young secretary who'd married Brandon Sterling, the society wife at charity galas, and finally, the revealed tech mogul on the cover of Forbes with the headline, The $1 Billion Secret. I spent 20 years hiding my light to protect a man's ego, she began, and the room fell silent. I built an $800 million empire in secret because I thought that's what love required, making yourself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. Nods rippled throughout the audience. So many women with similar stories, similar scars, similar dreams deferred. But here's what I learned during my midlife transformation journey, Catherine continued, adjusting Elizabeth slightly as the baby made a small sound. The only person responsible for a man's ego is that man. It's not our job to shrink ourselves to make others comfortable. It's not our responsibility to dim our intelligence, hide our ambition, or pretend we're less capable than we are. She clicked to the next slide, a graph showing the growth of Chen Technologies over 20 years. I started with $60,000 from my father's life insurance. Today, Chen Technologies is valued at $1.2 billion. But this isn't about the money. It's about what the money represents: freedom, choice, the ability to make decisions based on what's best for you, not what someone else demands. A hand went up in the audience. Ms. Chen, how did you find the strength to keep going when your husband was dismissing you? Catherine smiled. I had a secret that kept me going. Every time Brandon dismissed me as just a housewife, every time he took credit for an idea I'd planted, every time he introduced me as his better half While clearly thinking I was the worse half, I knew the truth, and that truth was my power. She shifted to the next slide, showing statistics about women over 50 starting businesses. Financial independence after 50 isn't just possible, it's powerful. Women in their 50s and 60s are the fastest growing segment of entrepreneurs. We have experience, wisdom, and let's be honest, we're done with everyone's nonsense. Laughter filled the auditorium. How many of us have made ourselves smaller to make others comfortable? Catherine asked, and hundreds of hands went up. How many of us have hidden our intelligence, our ambition, our financial success to protect someone else's feelings? Even more hands rose. I'm 52 years old, Catherine continued. I have a 6-month-old daughter. I'm single after a 20-year marriage to a narcissistic ex-husband who traded me in for a 23-year-old con artist who subsequently robbed him blind. And I've never been happier or more successful. Applause thundered through the space. Today, I'm announcing the Phoenix Fund's first round of grants, $10 million to be distributed to women over 50 who are starting businesses after divorce. Because women supporting women isn't just a hashtag, it's a revolution. And midlife transformation isn't about loss, it's about finally becoming who you were always meant to be. She clicked to a slide showing the application process. We're not looking for perfect business plans. We're looking for women who've been told they're too old, too unmarketable, too set in their ways to start over. We're looking for women who've been dismissed, discarded, and discounted. Because those are the women who build empires, not in spite of their experiences, but because of them. After the speech, Catherine made her way through the crowd. Elizabeth now awake and charming everyone with her gummy smiles. Women approached her with stories, business ideas, and gratitude. A 60-year-old woman who'd been told by her ex-husband that she'd never amount to anything showed Catherine the prototype for her invention. A 55-year-old whose husband had left her for his secretary presented her business plan for a consulting firm. "You give us hope," one woman said, tears in her eyes. "My millionaire ex-husband told me I'd be nothing without him. Seeing your story made me realize he was wrong." As Catherine was leaving the conference, her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Brandon is here, says it's about Elizabeth's trust fund." Catherine found Brandon in the lobby, looking out of place among the confident, purposeful women streaming past. He'd gained back some weight, looked healthier. His suit, while not designer, was clean and properly fitted. He was holding a folder and a small gift bag. "Brandon," Catherine acknowledged. "I watched your speech," he said. "On the live stream, you were magnificent." Catherine waited. She'd learned that Brandon's compliments usually preceded requests. "I wanted to give you this," he said, handing her the folder. "It's a trust fund for Elizabeth. Not much, $50,000. It's everything I've managed to save from my new job. I know it's nothing compared to what you can give her, but I wanted to contribute something real." Catherine opened the folder, scanning the documents. It was legitimate, properly structured, with Brandon having no control over the funds once deposited. "This must have taken you months to save." "6 months," Brandon confirmed. "I've been living in a studio apartment, taking the subway, cooking my own meals. All things you tried to tell me were not beneath me, but I never listened." He handed her the gift bag. Inside was a small, handmade wooden toy, a rocking horse, intricately carved. "I made it," he said, almost shyly. "Took a woodworking class. Figured Elizabeth should have something from her father that wasn't just bought with money." Catherine looked at the toy, genuinely surprised. In 20 years of marriage, Brandon had never made anything with his hands. He'd considered manual labor beneath him. "Thank you," she said simply. "Elizabeth will treasure it." Brandon nodded, started to leave, then turned back. "Catherine, that company I work for, Chen, subsidiary number 7. I think they're promoting me, not to executive level, but to senior analyst. My boss, the one who's 15 years younger, she said I'm finally learning to listen instead of just talk. She said I'm becoming a valuable team member instead of trying to be the star." "That's good. Brandon, real growth. I'm seeing a therapist too, trying to understand why I threw away everything real for something fake, why I needed to feel superior to feel valuable, why I couldn't see what I had until it was gone." He paused. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to become someone Elizabeth won't be ashamed to call her father. Catherine shifted Elizabeth in the carrier, the baby gurgling happily. Brandon, Elizabeth won't know you as the CEO of Sterling Industries or as my ex-husband. She'll know you as her father. That's a clean slate. Don't waste it. Brandon nodded and walked away, his steps steadier than they'd been in months. That evening, Catherine returned to the same restaurant where this story began chez Laurent, exactly 1 year after that fateful anniversary dinner. But this time, she wasn't alone, and she wasn't waiting. She sat at her usual table with Elizabeth in a high chair, Margaret and Patricia across from her, and David at the end, all celebrating Chen Technologies' successful IPO and the launch of the Phoenix Fund. Mrs. Chen, Henri, the maître d'hôtel, approached with genuine warmth. Your usual champagne, sparkling water for me. Henri, I'm still nursing, but champagne for my friends. We're celebrating. As Henri walked away, Catherine lifted Elizabeth from her chair, holding her close. The baby laughed, that pure, delighted sound that only babies can make. Reaching for her mother's necklace, a simple gold chain with a pendant bearing the Chinese character for strength. A gift from her father she'd never worn during her marriage because Brandon said it looked too ethnic. To new beginnings, Margaret raised her glass. To truth revealed, Patricia added. To empires built in shadows and brought into light. David contributed. Catherine raised her sparkling water. To all the women who've been told they're nothing without their husbands, may they discover they're everything on their own. As they clinked glasses, Catherine caught a glimpse of someone at the bar. Brandon, not drinking, just sitting with a cup of coffee and what looked like a textbook. He was studying, maybe for certifications to advance in his new career. Their eyes met across the restaurant. He raised his coffee cup slightly in a silent toast, then returned to his book. Catherine turned back to her chosen family, to her daughter, to her life that was finally fully hers. Outside, Manhattan glittered in the evening light, full of possibilities. Somewhere in the city, a 50-something woman was probably sitting at a restaurant, waiting for a husband who wouldn't show up, wondering if this was all there was to life. Tomorrow, that woman might see Catherine's story in the news. She might visit the Phoenix Fund website. She might realize that being discarded after decades of marriage wasn't an ending, but a chance to rebuild. She might understand that financial independence after 50 was possible, that narcissistic abuse could be survived, that midlife transformation could be powerful. Elizabeth reached for her mother's face, patting Catherine's cheek with a chubby hand and babbling something that sounded almost like, "Mama." "Yes, my darling," Catherine said, kissing her daughter's forehead. "Mama's here, and Mama's never hiding again." The lights of the city twinkled like stars, each one representing a dream, a possibility, a chance for reinvention. Catherine Chen had hidden for 20 years, built an empire in secret, and emerged from her divorce stronger than ever. Her story wasn't unique because of the money, it was unique because she'd chosen to share it, to show other women that they too could rise from the ashes of their former lives. Some endings, Catherine said to her friends, but really to herself, to the universe, to all the women who needed to hear it, are really beginnings in disguise. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's success. It's freedom. It's becoming who you were always meant to be. Elizabeth clapped her hands as if in agreement, and the sound echoed through the restaurant like applause, like approval, like the universe itself saying, yes, this, finally, this